We'll call the meeting to order, and we'll begin with item number 2, which is adoption of agenda and AB 361 finding. I'll turn it over to Keith Lemieux.
This is just a continuation of the AB 361 finding that allows the meeting to be partially telephonic and mainly for the benefit of the committees, as we're mostly doing these in person anyway.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there a motion on adoption of the agenda?
So move. Second.
All those in favor? Oh,
I have to roll
sorry,
call.
roll
Yep.
call vote.
Chairman Peters,
Aye.
Vice Chair Hayman,
Aye.
Director Itmeyer,
Aye.
Director Rotora,
Aye.
Director Vallejo.
I'm going to abstain because I just got audio and I'm not sure what we're voting on.
It's just the adoption of the agenda.
Oh, aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, our next item is item 3, public comment on closed session. Do we have anybody wanting to speak to the closed session agenda? Okay, seeing none, we will adjourn to closed session. reconvene in open session, and we'll begin with a report on closed session.
Sure. The board met in closed session to discuss the items identified. There is no reportable action on any of those items. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lemieux. Okay, next, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and our next item, roll call.
Chairman Peters,
Here.
Vice Chair Hayman,
Present.
Director Itnire,
Here.
Director Rotora,
Here.
Director Vallejo.
Present.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to item number 6, public comment. This time is reserved for members of the public to address the board on any matters not on this agenda. No action will be taken on non-agenda items unless authorized by law. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. And please state your name before making your presentation. Is there anyone public that would like to speak under public comment? Okay, seeing none, in person, it looks like we have one on the phones. Caller, go ahead. Go ahead,
Hello?
caller.
Yes, I just have a question under the minutes. So will you be taking public comment about the minutes before you vote on them?
The minutes that we approved prior to the meeting, or at the beginning of the meeting at 10 o'clock?
Oh, I don't know about those minutes. I'm talking about the ones from the last GA meeting on May.
Renee, if you're talking about the meeting minutes, they will be discussed during agenda item 8. So that would be the appropriate time to make your comment.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I was confused there. Thanks for clarifying. Okay, any other callers on the phone? Okay, seeing none, we'll now go to agenda item number 7, board member comments. Are there any comments from the board?
I do have. Last month, the GA board agreed to have the annual report on the agenda for this meeting. I understand the legal staff had a concern with the agenda item. I remind the board that the final decision regarding the agenda items rests with the board, and I do expect to see that agenda item on the next month's agenda. Item number 2, I requested at the last board meeting that the GA do some planning on multiple projects, including the GSP update, the interconnection project, and the annual report. I see no planning information in today's meeting packet. We are spending millions of taxpayer dollars. We are responsible to the public how we spend that money. I once again request the GA to do some fundamental planning, including schedule and budget. And I believe this recommendation is consistent with a recent PAC recommendation as well. And item 3, I suggest we get started immediately on the FY 2021 audit if we haven't already. As a matter of fact, can I get maybe the general manager, what is the status of the 2021 audit?
Sorry about that. At the end of our audit item on today's agenda, or as part of my report, I was planning to let you know that we are prepared to bring a proposal from our current auditor, Brown Armstrong, for 2021 to our July meeting. If the board agrees with that, we also have the choice of going out to bid, but staff recommends this would probably be a good year to just repeat the audit with the existing auditor. But we do have a proposal. We're prepared to bring it forward in July, and staff is absolutely prepared with the data to move ahead with it as soon as that's approved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from the board?
Mr. Chair, can I respond to?
Yes, sir, Mr. Lemieux.
Director Rotora brought up the question of of whether or not, why his request to have the annual report considered, why his request to consider having the annual report voted upon by the board was not brought up at this meeting. I don't want to give the public the impression that that was arbitrarily left off the agenda. The reason you don't see it in front of you is some things happened since the last meeting that bear on that. One is that attorney for the water district made representations in open court that suggest that the water district is prepared in court to challenge aspects of the GSP, which would put the water district, and if that is correct, and I've been told that that may or may not be correct by by the counsel for the water district, the other counsel for the water district, but assuming for the sake of argument that the first counsel was correct when he said that, that would create a conflict of interest on this. Number two, since the last meeting, the water district pulled its representative from the technical advisory committee, also citing a conflict of interest, presumably involving the same topic. And so again, it appears that this is a conflicted item for the water district. We raised this with water, rather than simply acting by fiat, we raised this issue with the attorney for the water district, who said he would check into the conflict issue and get back to us. And in the meantime, the agenda item was pulled. He has not yet gotten back to us. So I just want to make it clear that this was not arbitrarily done as an affront to Mr. Rotorua or the water district. This is based on events that have occurred and discussions that have had with water district council. That concludes my comments.
I think you're making this a lot harder than it is. There's no conspiracy here. There's no conflict. It's a matter of there's a report that is sent to DWR that represents this board. It's a board report to DWR. It should have a review by the board and certification by the board. It's really that simple. There's no conflict. We're not trying to do anything. There's no conspiracy, Keith. It's just a matter of let's have a quality report sent from this board to DWR.
Again, Director Rotorua, your own counsel is currently reviewing this issue. That's the status of it. He is currently reviewing the conflict of interest issue. So I didn't say anything about a conspiracy, but that's why it's not on the agenda right now.
Yeah, this is Jim Worth. Stan, I agree with Keith's explanation of this, and would expect it to be on the board in July. That's all I have.
Thank you. Are there any other board member comments? Anybody on the phone? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the consent agenda. And that first item is item 8A, approval of minutes of the board meeting May 11th, 2022. And then 8B, approve expenditures. That is 8BI, $57,905 for Stetson Engineers. B2, Regional Government Services. B3, Capital Core Group. B4, California Rural Water Association. And B5, Brown Armstrong. So we will call for public comment at this time on the consent agenda. Anybody like to address that? Okay, sounds like somebody's calling in right now. Go ahead, caller.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, this is Renee. This is Renee Westalusk, and I just have a question regarding number 12 on the it says RFP for imported water pipeline alignment study. The board approved that, and the last meeting, is that going to come out of the 7.6 million grant from DWR?
Mr. Johnson, would you like to address that?
Sure. Thank you, Renee. Yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions on the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Chairman Peters,
Aye.
Vice Chair Hayman,
Aye.
Director Itmeyer,
Aye.
Director Rotora,
Aye.
Director Vallejo.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Our next item is item number 9, board to receive and file the 2020 financial audit report from Brown Armstrong. And I believe we'll be hearing from Thomas Young on that.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen and ladies. Thomas Young.
You still there? I think we might need to pause for just a moment while we get this technical issue sorted out.
Well, Mr. Chairman, let me at least introduce the item on behalf of Mr. Young. And so you do have in your packet our audit, our long-awaited audit for 2020, and we are pleased that we're providing a clean report from our auditor, and we have Mr. Young, partner with Brown Armstrong, here to review that report with us whenever he's ready to proceed.
Okay, can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. Somehow it went on to unmute. But anyway, the purpose of the audit, I'm not sure where I cut out on you. Should I just start again?
Yeah, if you would, please.
Okay, very well. Yeah, so I'm here to present the December 31st, 2020 report for the authority. The purpose of an audit is to obtain an independent third party to come in and analyze the financial statement transactions of the authority. That includes obtaining third-party confirmations whenever possible. We'll confirm your cash balances and investments, your accounts receivable. We'll look at your grant revenue and your expenditures. Ultimately, we'll look at your internal controls as well as preparing the financial statement. We do all this work in order for us to issue or render an opinion, and that opinion is issued on page 1. That is the independent auditor's report. And I'm pleased to announce that we've issued what is considered an unmodified or clean opinion, and that is the highest form of assurance that we can render. In addition to that report, on page 13, we've issued what is considered a report on the authority's internal controls. Again, there was no issues. We've issued what is called an unmodified or, again, a clean opinion. In the prior year, 2019, there was one finding. That finding was resolved. Again, the issue of the report being so late, again, being issued is primarily due to switching accounting systems. I guess last year it was ran by the city of Ridgecrest, or the water district there, and then it transferred over. And so this back and forth is what has caused ultimately the delay of issuing the report. With that, I could go over the various numbers with you, but ultimately I'll just open it up to any questions anyone has.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Young. Are there any questions for Mr. Young at this point?
Yes, and not so much from the auditor, but there were a number of corrective actions recommended by the auditor that I believe he assumes that we've already done and corrected. Is that true, that we've actually modified our system to be consistent with what the auditor has recommended?
Yes, sir. We have addressed all of the outstanding issues.
Okay. And one last thing is, one of the recommendations, which is something that we have talked about in the past, was dropping Kern County as being in the loop. Are we going to bring that back to the board and reconsider that, or what's the status on that at this point?
We would still like to bring that back for discussion. We understand that, I believe there's a change to the bylaws, perhaps it's the bylaws, that needs to be made because Kern County is listed as the treasurer. So there's some administrative modifications that would need to be made before we could make that change, but it is still something that we would like the board to discuss.
Okay. So it's coming back to the board in the future to discuss?
Yes, sir, that's
Bottom
staff's
line.
intent,
Okay.
yes.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Mr. Young? We have one public speaker right now.
Thank you, Chair. Phil Hall, Deputy County Counsel. Just so everybody understands, we should be clear on something here. When you hear treasurer at the county, it's not like the treasurer of your local T-ball team or something that monitors the money and does the accounting and all that. When the county treasurer we're talking about, it is just a bank account. That's all it does is it holds money for public agencies. They do it for many. Some public agencies are required to use the treasurer, others aren't. So it's not like there's any accounting or anything that goes on at the county. It's just a bank account, just for clarification.
Good point. Thank you, Mr. Hall. Okay, any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Did you have more to present on this, Mr. Young, or did that conclude your report?
Yeah, that concludes this report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I will open it up now for public comment. Are there anybody or any other members of the public wishing to comment on this item? Okay, I'm not seeing any callers on the phone. So, did we need a motion to receive and file, or is this? Okay, great, thank you. Okay, well, that will bring us to item number 10, and that is the communication and engagement plan improvements and implementation. And I will turn it over to Carol.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you have in your packet a report on some proposed improvements to our communications and engagement plan. And we'd like to propose basically an action plan for implementation. I'm going to give a little bit of background, and then I'll ask Mr. Janis to give the PAC report before we circle back to the recommendation and proposed or possible action from the board. But just to give you some background here, you know, our GSP, our sustainability plan, includes a communications and engagement plan with specific requirements. Our PAC was instrumental in developing the C&E plan, and over the past several months they've been diligently reviewing that plan, reviewing other area plans, recommending some modifications, some enhancements to what's already there, ways that we can improve our outreach and communication. Staff strongly feels that this is something that really needs to be done, and in the report, I've outlined a variety of specific actions that I believe that we can get started on. Also proposing an initial budget for 2022, so this would last through the end of this calendar year, and identified some areas where we could pull from money that's already been budgeted and sort of divert it from what we specifically identified, and I think those areas can be associated with outreach and communication, things like stakeholder coordination. We have outreach identified for the shallow well program. We have conservation efforts. We can also identify other areas within our budget where we see lesser spending than anticipated, where we can divert some funds. But we see areas such as website improvement. We would really like to enhance our website, expand the information available, make it more user-friendly, make it a really effective tool for our community in terms of providing information. I'd like to see us do something like an electronic newsletter or an e-blast, just to let interested community members know what we're doing, what actions we're taking at meetings, that sort of thing. We would want to improve our social media presence because till now, I don't believe we've really had much of one at all. And that's a good way for our community to stay in touch with us and for us with them. And finally, we'd also like to see some public workshops implemented to really bring the community into what we're doing. At this point, I'd like to pause, though, and ask Dave Janis to give the PAC report so that you have the full picture of what we're looking at before we return for board action and or possible action discussion.
Thank you, Carol. You've got the PAC report in front of you. I'll summarize some items, call to your attention a little more detail to what Carol was covering. Initially, we met in a regular scheduled time last Thursday 2 weeks ago, and we had 8 members, voting members present and 3 non-voting members. Ed Imsand had resigned I think on the 19th of May, and I note that leaves us without a large ag representative, nor a small ag representative, but we still have a good number of folks. What we don't have representatives from all stakeholders, if you will. As we got to this was the single item, the single meaty item on our agenda, the Communication Engagement Plan review and recommendations up in view of the recommended corrective action that Carol referred to. And 8 individual PAC members submitted individual comments in writing, which we redistributed to everyone, and then had a very robust discussion in developing what our recommendations would be at this point. I'll give you a precursor. We later formed a committee to flesh those out a little bit further. But from those 8 individual submissions, we drew 4 major common areas that were present in almost every one of them, said different ways. Those 4 key areas were the key focus elements for the implementation and execution phase of the GSP. That was specifically called out by DWR, and that is a change from what the GSP, or what the Communication Engagement Plan was originally designed to address, which was the development of the GSP period. Under that, there were 4 major areas and one that covers them all that defined this. The first major one, sub-bullet A, 1A, was to provide an integrated and comprehensive schedule linking projects, tasks, budgets, responsible parties. It is similar to the POAM, the notorious POAM you've heard about before, and we've talked about it. It was consistent with their recommendations in March, and that includes a financial summary to give the public confidence in the financial execution and responsibility of the GA. The second major items, since it was about the GSP implementation, were on the projects and management actions. There's one, the GSP calls out 1 management action and 5 or 6 projects plus 2 potential projects. And those are the main items which require focused public engagement, methods of communication, small stakeholder groups, et cetera. The third one was to provide a summary statement or fact sheet about the overall purpose and objective for the GSP and the link to achieving sustainability in the basin. Easy for me to say. We view, in view of a few meetings that have been had and the public, more of the public recently becoming aware that this is a key. There's a foundational level of knowledge that is not present in some folks that are coming to the table at this point. The fourth one is consistent with that also, which is to provide a summary statement or fact sheet addressing the technical basis and modeling used to underpin the GSP. The work that was executed by this board, the staff, and the TAC for 3.5 years in developing that to give some public understanding and confidence in the underpinnings basis for the GSP. And then a summary, number 5 there, E, was a concise key element fact sheets. We're trying to describe what we were talking about up above in layman's terms, very important, but include references or definitions and definitions so you have clarity, because these are quite complex subjects. We recommended that they be concise, short, so they can keep people's attention. However, on some of those subjects, they're going to be more lengthy than that, and there you should provide an executive summary. Excuse me. The second major item was increased methods of public engagement and methods of engagement. Item A, focus on the stakeholder engagement communication. Focused on the stakeholders, there were two groups to that. One is the general public, all stakeholders, just becoming aware of this or searching for information or having their awareness heightened. We've seen them in some of the facilitation meetings needing that level of information. The second one is focus on each stakeholder group and their individual means that might be most appropriate to get to them. That means focused on them with regards to the information that they might be interested in, as well as methods of engagement. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the next one. Methods of engagement. The website, update, improve it, focus on it, and design it around the simplicity of search. For example, when you go on a search engine about groundwater in the Indian Wells Valley, it should get right to that link, and there should be, the link has, or the website has a lot of the information now, but it is arcane to the public in the way it is filed and how to research it, and there aren't clear fact sheets pointing you where to go. The next item, or sub-items under that, is accurate introductory material overall. The second is easy access to frequently asked questions, quote unquote, including, which would include perhaps those fact sheets, and not just that, but instructions on how to ask a question that doesn't appear there and get a timely response by whatever means, whatever communication method. Second, or item I increase the use of existing social media, which we had called out some in the previous C&E plan, but there are newer methods and more relevant to some of the sub-communities, stakeholders in the Valley now that we intend to provide recommendations for those or suggestions for those. Item 3, stakeholder targeted communication. This is the one that we think when we originally developed the C&E plan, we didn't get down to this level of detail. You've all heard folks stand in here and say, for example, we know in the development of the GSP, it was very difficult to get hold of some of the folks in the western part of the valley. They live there because they want to have their lives not intruded upon. They may or may not have some of these computer means of communication. They may not have access to the newspapers. They may choose not to, but the one place that almost everybody in West Kern that would be suggested to add is the bulletin board out at the general store, the hardware store in Kern, for example. That's a way to get to some of those people that wouldn't get any other means of communication push. That's a different way. That is an example of what we're suggesting. In subsequent discussion, a way to communicate with those residents in Trona, that we now have a representative on the TAC board. The residents of Trona are customer of the Searles Water Company. For example, the TIS store, I may not be saying that right, but there is a store that serves, it's not a general store, it's not a hardware store, but it serves as a de facto sort of gathering, everybody transits through place, et cetera, in Trona that has a bulletin board and where you could post and get information that otherwise wouldn't get to them. They're in a different county. They are a different valley, and they have no other common method other than the internet, which is also a different way to get them, and we'll make suggestions on that. But that may be the most effective way to physically contact a majority of them. Item C, provide key element fact sheets online at public meetings, key element fact sheets, and via proactive media push. We are going to attempt to provide, if we get it out of subcommittee, a prioritized recommendation for what should be the order of communication or for development of those key fact sheets. And we've summarized what the needs for are some of these up above. The main item number 3, we had 7 GSPs that were approved by DWR in other basins, not or critical basins all over the state. Plus, we had Owens Valley C&E plan, and we had a review. The PAC reviewed all those, and member Regina Troglum from Trona provided a first draft. We recommended each or many of the observations of the 8 individuals suggested there were key parts and sections and methods covered in those that we should consider. We all recognize that. We know they're there. We've deferred this until after we capture the other 3 main items. What should the GA be doing for communication engagement at this point? Then we'll capture as a subset of that what should be the changes in the formal C&E plan out once we agree on what the changes are overall and communication and engagement that the GA should participate in. That gets to number 4. To execute these items up above, you employ or assign a communication and engagement public relations director or a lead, for lack of a better name, and you should empower that person to respond and lead a communications effort, provide guidelines to them to allow them to be responsive, for example, in social media, or determine exactly what level of engagement we will have in social media. What you don't want is having every question or engagement, if you choose to engage with the public, that has to go back through legal staff. You want to have a battery of, what's been released previously, you can refer to, that kind of thing. And there are many ways to skin this cat. We've got some suggestions that we likely will give you. PAC members, those are the 4 main key areas. And what the subcommittee has gone off, it was chartered to go off and put a little bit more meat, a little bit more explanation to those, and perhaps 1 level of indenture below each one of them to bring back to the full PAC at our next meeting, which, if the full PAC meets agreement, we'll bring back to this board a month from today or 4 weeks from today, whatever, the first meeting in July. I'll say it that way. So we bring it back to you if we achieve agreement, and that will represent our recommendations for what we should be doing with regards to communication and the focus areas, the key methods and engagement, and all the things I've talked about here. And once we get concurrence from you all, or we know that this is what we recommend, we will, after that, go in and make the formal recommendations for what should be in a C&E plan itself. The need for the C&E plan is lesser than the need for improved communications, which has real urgency right now with the adjudication going on, with the implementation, things happening fast and furious, and the imported water and the interconnect, et cetera. The C&E plan is only a formal plan that is reviewed in the next 5-year update by DWR that they called out. That's where they're going to review that plan. So we postponed. The objective was that the PAC get the C&E stuff right and get the board aligned with that and agreed to what level they want to take that on, and then we would instantiate and document the changes necessary to the C&E plan itself, take into account those sections from the other approved plans, et cetera, and fold it together. That's trying to get most important, or what's most important, done first. And part of that was Carol had informed us that she was bringing this action item before the board, and we thought, for example, the parts that she included in her action item were very relevant in capturing what we said, but we wanted to get full committee agreement and flesh out on this to you as fast as possible. Now, each one of we all noted that each one of these contains subsets of what we recommended in March, which is our first review of the C&E plan prior to taking into account DWR's recommended corrective action number 1 and their report. All these do not modify those recommendations for March. In fact, every one of those March recommendations is consistent and considered within this. So if anything, it bolsters it. And one thing, there's a lot of potential fact sheets here and a lot of communication during the implementation period that's going to be required. You're going to need some, in addition to a lead that's Carol's proposed, and you proposed a budget, you're going to need some help in this. And we believe we may have some folks willing to volunteer to help draft certain things, or perhaps social media folks that may volunteer to execute it with supervision and guidelines, those guidelines I mentioned before, for engagement with the public. So the idea was to hold down the expense, actually to get the public involved, to get the younger public in particular involved, and we may bring that recommendation next time. I'm tipping you off on some of the discussions we've had. So we established an ad hoc committee. The committee met once and is meeting again. The subcommittee met once, and the subcommittee is meeting again tomorrow. If we get towards a completed document, we'll bring that to the PAC. We'll send it to the PAC for consideration prior to our meeting in 2 weeks, and then try to get out of the PAC meeting on the end of June a document that we can bring back to you with what our recommendations are for communication and engagement changes and recommendations. I think that's all I have. Are there questions or comments?
Thank you very much, Dave. Appreciate all your work and all the PAC's work. I think there's a lot of good stuff in there. And I wanted to thank Carol as well for bringing this to the board. I think it's super important for this board that we get as much information as we can out there, get the public as informed as we can on what's going on, and give them those opportunities to learn a little bit more about the process and what we're doing and why we're doing it. So I just wanted to commend everybody for their work on that. Are there any other questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, it's John Vallejo. I think it looks good in the direction we're heading. It looks good. I guess my only concern is what I would deem the black hole of social media engagement. I'd be wary to staff someone to quote unquote engage with the public, and when it comes to comments and messages and back and forth, it often devolves in terms of conversations on social media, and there's really no getting around a lot of that. I think at the most, I'm comfortable with putting out our official information on social media and directing people to where they can get more information. Not really like quote unquote engaging with people on social media in the typical sense of back and forth with comments and messaging and those issues, because just having seen how that works, especially over the last few years from the county's perspective, it's usually a wasted effort when it comes to trying to help provide a consistent message and official information. If we go beyond just posting the efforts that we're making and the information we're trying to get out, I just have some concerns there about what engagement really means and how far down that hole we really want to go.
Yeah, point well taken, Director Vallejo. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Director Vallejo. That item was a specific topic of discussion both in the PAC and then in the subcommittee. And we noted there are levels you can go between pushing the information out and then putting restrictions on no response on the website, to the other end, which is more of a wide open and often a cesspool that we see in in social media. There are some intermediate steps that we might propose you explore, and I would say you may expect to see a little bit on that spectrum. You won't see on the far end, of course, but you may see one alternative or two alternatives to the recommendation just to post only. It may include, for example, a way to respond to those questions that are not covered in the frequently asked questions, but we are sensitive to that. And Chairman Peters, on behalf of the PAC, I thank you for those comments, and I will say there was a real sense of pleasure and excitement to serve that the PAC felt when Carol spoke about proposing this action item at the meeting. And so I think we've got some good energy behind getting you some good recommendations.
Sounds like it. Thank you, Mr. Janus. Are there any other board comments?
Is the staff recommending that we cut out $60,000 to perform this work being suggested by the PAC? Is that the bottom line?
Yes, sir, Director Retora. The action that we're proposing for the board today would be for us to, yes, to carve out $60,000 out of our existing budget, basically using line items that we've already established and slightly redirecting them because we feel that they're related to C&E activities anyway. And we would use that towards this initial implementation plan, taking the PAC's recommendations, working, and I'll continue to work with the PAC on each of these activities and try to incorporate their recommendations as best we can within budget, of course. And so this proposal is essentially for the balance of 2022, and then as we develop our budget for next year, we can incorporate additional activities at that point.
Okay. I support what the PAC is trying to do. I want to make that totally clear, but I am not clear about the funding. In particular, I see money coming from shallow well outreach, and I'm interpreting that as the shallow well mitigation fund as opposed, because I wasn't aware of us having a shallow well outreach. It's the mitigation fund you're talking about?
This is yes, but it's specifically geared toward outreach, so it's related to the communications and engagement activities.
Oh, okay. I guess my feeling, the shallow well mitigation fund is for actually funding shallow wells that have gone dry or are going dry. It is unless there are words in the Prop 218 definition of what it is that actually say this is appropriate, I guess I don't go along with that. In terms of a couple of the other things is conservation efforts. We don't have a conservation effort fund. What fund is that money currently in, may I ask?
These are all in the extraction fee. Is that right, April? They're all in the extraction fee, and they're all items that we have within the existing budget.
Okay, if the conservation $20,000 is out of the extraction fee, I have no problem with that. Obviously, the shallow well mitigation, I can't go along with that. And litigation support, when I last looked at it, it was mostly out of the replenishment fee. And again, that is a Prop 218 fee that is for importing water. And even though I can see sort of a off, way out, it doesn't directly impact imported water.
I understand what you're saying, Director, but this is actually within the extraction fee. It's litigation support. Actually, I think it's Stetson budgeted litigation support, but it's within the extraction fee.
Real quick, just to jump in. Ms. Decker, we're going to get to public comment in just a minute, but I wanted to see if Phil Hall could provide a little background or clarification on that.
Okay.
issue as well.
I guess I just need a better definition specifically of where the money is coming from before I can support it. That's all I'm trying to get at.
Understand?
Thank you, Chairman. Two things that just were mentioned here, mitigation fee, replenishment fee. First, the mitigation fee, it does going to mitigate wells and what issues are there, but it would of course include reaching out to those people who we're going to mitigate. It's part of the process, just like the Water District has a 218 fee for serving water, which they then use to do various pamphlets, et cetera. They don't have a special fee for a pamphlet that they send out on a 218. On the replenishment fee use for litigation, this is the second time we've had this conversation, and the last time I mentioned that one of the provisions in Mojave Pistachio's lawsuit specifically states that they're suing because they believe that the replenishment fee can only be used to pay for the litigation defense. It's the only fee that can be used. We budgeted based on some of that argument. I'm not going to go to whether or not they're correct on that, but that is their argument in their litigation. They have a basis for that argument. This board has chose to use the replenishment fee for its legal defense, so that's completely appropriate under 218. I'm not sure why we're having this discussion again, because it was rather detailed discussion in November, where I again quoted the litigation and the lawsuit against this board saying you must use the replenishment fee, not extraction fee, to defend the litigation. And I would point out, Mojave Pistachio is not paying that replenishment fee right now. So their argument is you should have no funds to defend your litigation that they've provided against you. That's the underlying basis of it. So yes, we're completely appropriate using both of these for these items.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Are there any other comments from the board?
My only point is that the general fund is a general fund. Neither the replenishment fee or the shallow well mitigation fee is a general fund. We need to be careful what we're spending that money on.
Understand, and just for clarification, when we refer to the item for litigation support, that is within the extraction fee budget, not the replenishment fee.
Chairman, if I may again, we've had this discussion numerous times. This agency does not have a general fund. General funds are general property tax dollars, which can be used by an agency in any manner it wants. Kern County has a general fund. It also has restricted funds, waste management funds, et cetera, which are related to the special benefit provided and charged for in that fund. This agency has no general taxing authority and no general fund. Everything is specific. In fact, the argument that is being made by Mojave is the extraction fee is not appropriate as a special benefit to defend on litigation against the replenishment fee or an adjudication. There is no general fund for this agency. If there was, you'd have unrestricted funds. What you have are 3 separate restricted funds.
Good point. Thank you. Okay, Director Heyman?
Real quick, I just want to concur with Chairman Peters on the importance of this plan and all of your hard work that's gone into it. It was something that we've discussed in the past, and we've seen it finally come into to fruit here. So I just had a quick question on the prioritizing of the different individual aspects of it. Are we looking at the target audience and where, you know, the largest population base and focusing on that group and getting the, I would say, I call it the best bang for the buck when we're working with the, you know, the allotted funds that we have?
Yes and no, and we haven't worked that out yet for sure. For example, you know, at the top level, we thought some of the things that I mentioned first with regards to the, you know, overall purpose and objectives for the GSP, some communication at the top level of what SGMA's about, the formation of the GA and its authorities and why, how the GSP's projects and management actions link to getting us to sustainability. And then, you know, the next lower in that probability, those are general public communication, but some of the tailoring we talked about are what are the issues, the impacts, or there are different impacts for certain stakeholders than there are for others. And so we should be focused on what are the general public's overall need to know, and what are if there's a need for a specific stakeholder-focused topic on impacts for them, and how we prioritize that. It's going to be, what do you do first? And we're going to take a shot at it. That's coming out of the subcommittee. It may not get through the whole committee. We had this discussion before, and it didn't get through the whole committee, but we thought we owed you at least a grouping of what those might be, what is the public asking about most? What are the stakeholders, who are the stakeholders that seem to be the most concerned about what's going on, and their knowledge of key aspects of it? What are their impacts? What are the probabilities of success of the GSP, with what project? I mean, for example, project number one and I'm doing this from memory, under the GSP is imported water supply, I think. And there are two components of that I think are on the tip of everybody's tongues right now. Where are we getting the water? How are we getting the water? The water purchase of water rights or access to water itself. The second one is the interconnect, the delivery method. And is that real? Is that pipe dream? Is that going to be 50 million, or is it going to be 300? You hear numbers. Those are the kind of things, that'd be pretty high on the priority list, for example. And I know we have reports from Capital Corps, and I know from my own work, we're working on a lot of the funding grants to tee up those options. The public isn't aware of those. The number one thing in implementing the GSP, after you understand the rationale for Sigma and the GA and a GSP and getting to sustainability, is how do we execute this plan? And that's imported water, those two components of it, and is it real? Is anything happening, or are we twiddling our thumbs? And as you all know, we're not twiddling our thumbs. The GA is not twiddling our thumbs. There's a lot of things happening, a lot of moving parts, and that's only obtusely being communicated to the public. And that's where, for example, emphasis needs to be made in the implementation phase of the GSP. And I probably didn't answer your question, but
Well, you did, and my thoughts are, it's seems to be kind of an educational, aspect too, and educating the mass public and getting the most efficient, base of people out there brought up to speed, I think would be, like high priority, and then working down from that, because some of the other areas may be not as cost effective on getting the public at large educated on and brought up to speed and kept up to date on as to what we've accomplished, where we're going, and the reasonings, behind it. But I'm in complete support of what you're doing. So, and I'm sure this will be stuff that would be brought back to us, as we move through this. So I mean,
whatever the committee comes up with in June, or in our 2 weeks from now, we'll bring back to you. This is one thing that we're striving to do, the priority. We may not get it accomplished, but we may get it, at least groupings or some sense of what I've said today.
Thank you, sir.
And so if I can just jump in here too, before we give you a staff recommendation, that our intent is for staff to manage the program. We'll work with the PAC and look for their recommendations, their review, their approval, but we'll develop the plan. We'll be looking for some outside assistance as we need it. Website improvements are a good example, but we'll definitely have more information for you as we progress. But the recommendation before you today then is to allow us to sort of carve out or allocate $60,000 from our existing budget towards the initial implementation plan for these improvements to our C&E plan.
Great, thank you. Any other comment from the board? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to public comment.
Good afternoon. Judy Decker, Vice President of the Eastern Kern County Conservation District, a PAC member who has worked diligently on what David has given you. Communication is the key to getting people to understand what is happening to them. One of the things that hasn't been talked about, nor is it really a PAC responsibility except to mention it, but I mention it to you, are some technical reports. One that used to be done 30 years or so ago by the Kern County Water Agency was an annual change report. And the change was the drop in water in storage. And if a simplified version of that could be created and put on the website, it would show everyone the dire water situation that exists in this valley. You know, I just heard from a member of the audience who listened in that the next court appearance for the adjudication is in December sometime. Well, by the time this adjudication gets settled out, we might not have any potable water, and we probably all will no longer be here. It is critically important to let people know the facts. You know, you go to the doctor and the doctor says, oh yeah, you got high cholesterol, and you don't pay any attention to that until you look at the lab report and your cholesterol level is 450. Then you're going to get a little alarmed. So I think this is not something to do in the next 2 weeks. And your TAC has dwindled down to 1 or 2 people, unfortunately. But I think you need to think about getting some accurate, simplified, technical reports, like a change in storage report. It's not a report, it's a map, actually, to put on the website. And I'm glad that the staff has listened to the PAC and is going to take some action. And Mr. Vallejo, your issue of social media, I agree with 100%.
Thank you, Ms. Decker. Any other public comment here in the room? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to the phones. Caller, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, this is Renee Westelusk, and my comment has to do with social media. I agree with the other 2 comments, Director Vallejo and Judy Decker, on the social media. We have to be extremely careful. And when I reviewed the Salinas Valley Basin C&E plan, I just want to let you know they do social media, but they don't have their own social media accounts or web pages. What they have done is they have used the social media platforms of existing well-established partner agencies and organizations, and that's how they inform the public. They maybe have a facts and questions posted like on their chamber Facebook page. They get the partner agencies. I mean, we have a county, we have a city, we have a chamber, we have Rotary clubs. It's those types of organizations that you could probably piggyback off of to just put information out to the public and then not have the burden of having to monitor and have professional cybersecurity people monitoring in case that, that GA's Facebook or Twitter accounts got hacked, because I've read enough on this, and they can be hacked. And then you've got the nightmare of removing terrible comments or whatever someone might have posted on your social media account. So I just want you to take that into consideration, that maybe it's not a good idea for the GA to have their own social media accounts, and that they can leverage their relationships with their other partner agencies and still accomplish the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Good suggestions. Okay. Go ahead, caller.
Hi. Good afternoon. This is Mike Senat. I have some comments about a number of things, but I'll stick to communications. The first thing I'd like to say is that I like Mr. Hall's new look. I'm going to follow his lead and pull out my Jerry Garcia ties. I have a expertise in communications. I ran a company for 20 years, 24/7, 365, for large banking and trade associations, business to business. The best way you can communicate is by broadcast email. And you can create your dynamic fact sheets, policy statements, etc. as you go along. The other thing that I'm doing right now is I'm live feeding and make your website information central by posting both the video and the live feed prior to the meeting. As far as all the other suggestions that are being made on communications, those sound good, but I would echo Director Viejo and the previous caller. I would not have anything to do with social media. The potential for cross communication and policy position being massaged, I object, and I think that everything should come from the mouth of the board. RGS is a private contractor. They shouldn't be involved in policy. They shouldn't do anything other than maintain the data and the website. And pretty much that's what I'd like to say about that. I'm concerned about the bureaucracy. The PAC has fallen apart. The TAC is non-existent with the exception of 2 members. And it's impossible, I'm sorry, to listen to endless bureaucrat speaking points. This is equally frustrating for the people. So I would appreciate it if you would simplify things instead of thinking of ways to spend more money. And one final word, I would object strongly to the consideration of a PR director for reasons you might gather. I think the chairman of the board of directors should be the speaker and the leader. And that's thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay, not seeing any more callers. We'll come back. We have another public speaker in the room.
Wes Katzenstein, a member of the PAC, and I've been working with supporting David in what we've been providing you. And it's occurred to me that one of the things, we're looking at communication and engagement. Engagement, in my mind, is as much the public coming in here and making comment and being part of the process as it is us getting the word out to the public. We're really successful in engaging the public if they show up and contribute. And that really hasn't happened like it could, and like we'd like to see it happen, despite everyone's excellent efforts to that end. But we do hear that there is huge amounts of engagement happening in social media, but it's wild and woolly and can run amok and, help us. So the engagement's out there, but I think it's proper for us to be very cautious in getting in that fray. But there might be some ray of light there if there's some way we could point, if there's some dialogue going on and it's running amok or incomplete in social media, if we could point them to links to the webpage and do nothing more than that, if we could somehow try to tie some of these dialogues down to, what I consider to be the high ground. Our webpage needs to be the high ground in this whole melee. So if there's some way we could point this dialogue that goes on just to links in the webpage and maybe nothing more, perhaps there's something there, but I don't know how we do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Okay, seeing none, I will bring it back to the board. Is there a motion on staff's recommendation?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second? Okay, I'll go ahead and second that motion.
Chairman Peters?
So before we call for the vote, just one comment, because I was going to make a different motion, but a very similar one. I was going to make a motion that we approve, except for the idea of putting any resources towards social media engagement. That would be where my thoughts lie with regard to actually spending money here. I think the rest of it's appropriate, and I think it's a good idea. It's so open-ended and ambiguous at this point with regard to what we would actually spend money on for social media engagement. I'm a little concerned about that. Not only for just, again, what I consider to be a black hole of potential problems, but also just for budgeting purposes. It's not clear to me what tangible efforts we'd make there. So, obviously we need to go forward with a vote on the current motion unless we want to rescind it and modify the motion. But that's where my thoughts are on this particular item.
Thank you, Director Vallejo. And Carol, if you could clarify, I believe this is more just an initial allocating to start the planning stages and kind of develop that strategy. It's not necessarily implementing anything in particular.
Exactly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was going to suggest that we would be bringing back additional information on what specific activities we'd be doing. But with regard to social media, I do hear a lot of reservations and concerns. I agree with them wholeheartedly. On the flip side of that, social media happens to be one of the best ways to engage younger members of the community. And so I don't think we want to take it off the table entirely, but we do want to further investigate it and make sure that however we venture into that area makes sense. And I think we heard some really good comments and suggestions. So my thought is we can just bring additional information back at a future meeting in terms of how we might propose to implement it, and we can assign a better budget to our proposed activities as well. You're right, this is to basically get us started.
Thank you, Carol, and I think Mr. Ron Strand had some comments.
Yeah, Ron Strand, City Manager, staff of the GA. I don't think it's wise to totally lock out social media. I mean, that is where everything is at. You produce a video, where are you going to post it? Social media. So I think that, do we want to engage the public in social media on an argument basis or a point-to-point basis? No. But you have to have social media as a medium to put your information out. So to lock that out initially, I think is not wise.
Point well taken. Thank you. Director Vallejo, does that kind of address your concerns, or would you still prefer to put a different motion forward?
Yeah, no, I'm okay with where we are with those explanations. It does sound like we still have a lot more to go before we make any specific budgeting decisions on how far to go into the social media realm. And I'm okay with where we are at this point, having heard all that.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion, a second. If there's no more discussion, I guess we can call for a vote.
Chairman Peters?
Aye.
Vice Chair Hayman?
Aye.
Director Itnire?
Aye.
Director Rotora?
No.
Director Vallejo?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to item number 11, the Water Resource Manager's Report. And I will turn that over.
Yes, there was one other item under item 10. I wanted to give a quick update on the TAC.
Okay.
And there's a PowerPoint. Thank you for putting it up. So we'll do that first and then go right to Water Resource Management. It shouldn't take very long, not as long as that last one, David. Just a joke. Well, one of the things I did want to say is, David, you're doing a great job. I mean, when I first came up here, Steve Johnson, Stetson Engineers, Water Resource Manager. When I first came up here, I was amazed at the amount of volunteers, both technical and non-technical stakeholders up here. And David, you're one of them. And Judy and Don and West and Lyle and Nick Panzer, all of you, everybody have provided a tremendous amount of help, and it's all volunteer. It's pretty amazing, even though we'd love to have more public participation. Anyway, on the PAC, a couple of people have mentioned the situation on the TAC, and as we know, TAC members can come from recommendations from the PAC. So when we want to talk about whether we want to re-emphasize in your next meeting, make it an agenda item, that if somebody has, a PAC member has a representative they'd like to recommend to the TAC, we're certainly open to that. There's a short PowerPoint up there. I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this, except I've said it before, but I want to make sure everybody's aware how important the TAC has been and how important the TAC is. That group, that TAC, and the folks that volunteered and participated on that TAC from the time we got here in 2017 have been extremely helpful and extremely valuable to our learning curve, getting up to speed, to develop that GSP, which was the assignment of the TAC, was to work with the Water Resources Manager and the board and develop the GSP. Extremely helpful to get that done. There were a lot of big technical issues that came up. One of the biggest ones was sustainable yield, and the group on that TAC was able to get through the sustainable yield and get consensus on what the sustainable yield is for the basin, for the purposes of going forward to manage the basin. There were differences of opinion and some very, very smart people who thought that sustainable yield is way too high. It was way too high, but we found compromise and we're working around that right now. And I mentioned before, we'll be looking at it again at the 5-year update with the new information that we may have. So I just wanted to emphasize how important that TAC is. It's also important to the implementation of the GSP. We have a lot of work to do. We had kind of a lull after we completed the draft, or got the board to approve, and then we submitted, I'll call it the draft, because it's the final, GSP to DWR. We had a lull because DWR took 2 years to review things. As far as technical work to be done, while we were allowed to move forward on some things, we were kind of in a bit of a lull, and I think it affected the TAC. We didn't have TAC meetings. We also had COVID and other issues, but we didn't have that many technical issues to address, and we had some attrition. We lost a few members, and that's just the way it is. We re-energized the TAC. We've got it going. We've got issues out to the TAC members to prioritize several technical issues to be reviewed, including things like methods to evaluate storage. Judy Decker mentioned posting storage on a regular basis and on an annual basis and things like that, like Kern County has done. One of the issues we're going to be looking at the TAC is agreement on appropriate methods to estimate a sustainable yield, change in storage on a regular basis. Those things are going to be brought before the TAC. Concern right now is that, we indicate up with the PowerPoint, at our last meeting, we still had a reasonable membership. It wasn't a full membership. I don't think we called it a quorum. We didn't have a quorum, did we? We did have a quorum, but we had reasonable membership, and we had very, very smart people, very good contributors to our TAC. That was just a month ago. And I'm not sure what actually happened, but the Water District had a facilitation for DWR and adjudication on the 17th, and 2 days later, we lost 2 very key members. I'm not sure why Meadowbrook pulled their TAC representative, Large Ag. Eddie was vice chairman before, then he became sort of the acting chair. And certainly Meadowbrook can do what they feel is appropriate for them. They're a private entity. They're funding, Eddie's time on this. But 2 days after the facilitation, we got a letter from Meadowbrook pulling Eddie Teasdale off, and a letter from the Water District pulling Tim Parker off. And I will say both Eddie and Tim have been very good contributors to the TAC, good information. Not everybody agreed about everything, but we got good information, good technical input from these folks. As I put up there, up on the PowerPoint, we're now down to really 2 voting members and what's it, four active members. So we're going to work through the PAC to see if we can initiate some more interest in the TAC. It's important. It's extremely important to us for implementation to get input from technical people. We will continue to do that regardless of what the TAC does. The options are to try to reload the TAC, which we will try to do. Hopefully people are watching that might be interested, and we'll get in touch with David about maybe being recommended. So that's one option, to try to reload the TAC and get going again. We're not slowing down on the issues. We're still sending stuff out to the existing TAC members. Another option is if it makes sense, we may have to come out to the board to get approval for this, because the TAC is in the bylaws, and how we operate a technical advisory committee, we may need to come back to the board and get approval on this. But we may get down to a point where we just hold, the water resources manager just holds technical public workshops where we bring up technical issues, we distribute the information, and we'll have a public workshop on the technical issues and allow people to participate. It's important that we bring back that level of participation on technical issues to DWR when we bring back the 5-year update. It's important we have that outreach and get that input from the technical folks. So we're working on that. I just want to give an update. That's where we are. It's mentioned by 3 different people here that the TAC is decimated, and it is. It's in bad shape. We still have good people. Don Decker, we talked to Don. Gene Moran in my office talks to Don on a regular basis, and he's an extremely valuable resource, and he's still here. So he helps a lot. Thank you. You can tell Don how much we appreciate it. Anyway, that's where we're at, and we will be reporting on the TAC as we go forward. I thought it was important to bring it because a significant change occurred from the last board meeting to where we are now on TAC membership, and that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Appreciate you catching that oversight there. Okay, now we will move on to number 11, and I'll turn it back over to you, Water Resource Managers report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe I've got Joseph Montoya on the line, and probably Jeff Helsley, who Joseph will be the first one to give a report. I just want to get one bit of clarification so that there's not a misunderstanding on an item that board member Stan Vertora mentioned earlier about bringing back information, planning documents on things like the GSP recommended corrective actions or the pipeline. We're going to provide an update on the pipeline RFP right now, so it's there. But I want to make sure it's clear that it's not that we're not listening. I heard the comments at the last meeting, but we have work tasks and budget items, and if there's a special thing that any of the board members would like us to work on and bring back, we need to get direction from the board. Rather than just one director. We got in trouble from that before, trying to keep everybody happy. When a board member asks for something, we go do it, and then our budgets are too high and stuff. So anyway, if there's an item specific that we'd like to have us look at, we're happy to do it, bring it back and present it if we can get board direction on it. That's what we would do. So I don't want to give the impression that we weren't paying attention or ignoring something that one of the board members that asked for. So I think we're ready to go. Joseph, if you want to pick it up on Prop 1.
Yes, thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, members of the board, members of the public. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thank you. So I'll be going over the first 4 items under the Water Resources Manager report. And I just want to preface these slides by saying we do have updates for the Prop 1 and the Prop 68 grants. We also thought it'd be a good idea to sort of give an overview about those 2 grants in particular, because we're sort of approaching our final work completion date for those grants, and we'll be going into final reporting and close out with DWR on those grants. So we thought it'd be a good idea to give an overview about what sort of work occurred under those grants and what will be occurring going forward. Just to sort of paint the big picture about what's going on with those two. So starting with the first slide, the Prop 1 status update, we have 3 outstanding invoices. Invoice 12A for $132,693.95, and then invoice 13A in the amount of $299.70. Those invoices have both been approved by DWR. I think staff is just currently awaiting payment for those 2 invoices, so hopefully we should be receiving those in the near future. We did submit invoice package 14A a couple weeks ago. That package covers the period from January through March of this year, and the total payment requested after retention was $64,941.88. Again, we submitted that about 2 weeks ago on May 27th, so hopefully we'll be hearing back from DWR soon about whether that invoice has been approved. So moving on to the next slide is where we start to take a look at the overview for the Prop 1 grant. And just a refresher for the board and for the public, the GA was awarded the Prop 1 grant in 2017 in the amount of $2.146 million. The primary purpose of the grant was to do a lot of the technical work and investigations that would feed into developing the GSP and then actually developing and writing the different sections of the GSP. So some of that work included developing the conceptual model and updating the numerical model to run different sustainability scenarios, identifying data gaps, installing new equipment to collect data that would feed into the GSP monitoring network, and performing aquifer tests and collecting water quality samples for that as well. Creating and uploading data to the data management system that's currently ongoing, and then again, preparation of the GSP and some of the feasibility studies that went into that as well. And then sort of related to the GSP, but not necessarily directly related to preparing it, were the water conservation pilot projects for severely disadvantaged communities. That work is still ongoing, and that's the primary focus of the work that will occur in the future for this grant. And then stakeholder outreach, grant admin and reporting, and overall project management for developing the GSP. So with that said, on the next slide, I have a update for the grant payment summary for Prop 1. This is an update to a table we had presented several months ago. So I won't go into it in too much detail, but I will call your attention to the cells at the bottom in orange, where we show the total amount awarded under Prop 1, and then the total amount remaining to request through our completion date, which is October of this year. And I'll go into a little more detail on that in the next slide. So again, like I mentioned, the remaining work under the Prop 1 grant is primarily for the programs for severely disadvantaged communities, different water conservation efforts, drought management planning, and a meter change-out program. Again, that work has a completion date of October 31st of this year. So going back again towards the amount remaining to request, about $320,000, about $267,000 of that falls under the SDAC program, and we anticipate billing that amount in full, requesting reimbursement from DWR for that. Now, the remaining amount, we don't really anticipate being able to request for reimbursement, and the reason for that is we have a structure for the work tasks under this grant from our funding agreement with DWR, and a major component of that is aquifer tests that were performed several years ago. In our original Prop 1 grant application, we had anticipated performing up to 3 aquifer tests, and our budgets in the grant agreement account for that, performing 3 tests. And just due to an overall lack of opportunity and availability of wells, both production and monitoring wells, during certain times of the year in order to perform those tests, we were only able to perform 2 out of the 3 planned aquifer tests. And so we have about $50,000 or so that we don't anticipate being able to ask for reimbursement, primarily because of that reason. So again, we're looking to approach that completion date and fulfill all of the requirements of our funding agreement by October. And then following that date, we will be moving into grant completion reporting and again, fulfilling all of the other items of our grant agreement so we can prepare a retention invoice for the amount that DWR has been withholding throughout the term of this agreement. So that's an overview of the Prop 1 grant. Now I'll be moving into the Prop 68 grant, first again with the status update and then the sort of overview of the grant. Again, here we have 3 outstanding invoices. Invoice 12B in the amount of $3,158.82. Payment for that invoice was received in late May, so that's good news. Invoice 13B in the amount of $272.09. Again, that invoice has been approved, and we're just currently awaiting payment for DWR. Invoice 14B, similar to Prop 1, we submitted that invoice package a couple weeks ago covering January through March of this year. The amount requested after retention for that invoice was $1,885.36. So on the next slide, we have the overview of the Prop 68 grant. If you'll recall, the GA was awarded this grant in 2020. The original award was for $330,000, but due to different appropriation of funding issues that DWR had at the time, they were only able to make $300,000 of that award available. The GA recently entered into an amendment to its funding agreement to basically get that other $30,000 that wasn't made available at the time. So the total award amount is $330,000 for Prop 68. And again, the purpose of this grant was to fund work that Stetson and GA staff, particularly legal staff, had been doing to feed into development of the GSP, and particularly in running different allocation scenarios and determining how to best sustainably manage the basin from a pumping perspective. Again, development of different scenarios for modeling and ongoing discussions with engineering staff and attorneys, and also with some of the various pumpers about different allocation scenarios. And then in addition to that was engineering support for particularly the extraction fee, and that included preparing data packages for the public to review, and then ongoing review of monthly reporting forms for production, and review of meter compliance submittals through the GA's meter requirement ordinances. And so again, here for Prop 68 on the next slide is an update to the grant payment summary table. And again, I won't go into detail in this, but I will again call your attention to the bottom. We have a total amount remaining to request of about $35,000. Now, this amount, we do anticipate being able to request the full amount that's available under this grant if we go to the next slide. The remaining tasks for this grant are sort of ongoing and are sort of as needed, engineering support for allocation discussions and for reviewing compliance and records and submittals for the extraction fee. We again have a completion date of October 31st of this year, but we do anticipate billing that full amount. Now, we may have to go back and potentially work with our DWR grant manager to see if we can request reimbursement for past costs, like, for example, the Prop 218 report preparation, because that does qualify as engineering support related to extraction fees in the basin. But regardless, we do anticipate requesting reimbursement for the full grant amount. And similar to Prop 1, we have a schedule for completion reporting that will occur after our work completion date. And then following that completion reporting, we'll be preparing a retention invoice for the 10% withheld by the state. So that is the overview for both of those grants. Now I'll move on to the third grant funding update, the Sigma Implementation Project grant. And again, this is the $7.6 million grant that the GA was awarded a couple months ago for the imported water interconnection project. We received a draft of the funding agreement for this grant by our grant manager over at DWR a couple weeks ago, actually last week. That funding agreement is sort of being reviewed collectively by us, Stetson, the general manager, Carol, and by legal counsel. We do have some, at least at Stetson's level, we do have some comments on the funding agreement that we're hoping to sort of combine with other comments that we get from Carol and our legal counsel and forward those over to DWR for discussion so that hopefully we can get towards executing this agreement. Now, because of the overall timeline of the grant, if you'll recall, all of the work under this grant will need to be complete by, I think, April or June of 2025. So we have a little under 3 years to complete a lot of this imported water work. So we have already started proceeding with some of that work, and the first and really the critical task is this imported water pipeline alignment study. We approached the board last month with a request for proposals for consultants to submit proposals to prepare this alignment study. The RFP was posted online and on the GA's website in late May, and we held a pre-proposal meeting last Thursday to sort of introduce the RFP to the consultants that were interested and sort of give the GA's expectations for the scope of work and the different technical elements that we're anticipating the consultant to consider when making a recommendation for this alignment for imported water pipeline. So the consultants are presumably working on their proposals right now, and we have a deadline for a proposal submission of June 27th. So after that deadline, we'll have about a week or so, or maybe 2 weeks, to review the proposals and score them and potentially conduct any interviews in case we need additional information or want to further refine our selection of the consultant. And we plan to approach the board in July with a final selected consultant and then to request authorization to enter into a contract with the consultant. And then not shown on this slide, but just another update for this grant, we are working on preparing a different request for proposals for an environmental consultant that will sort of take the lead on the various CEQA and NEPA documentation part of this grant work. We're not sure exactly when we'll have that RFP ready for the board, but we are working on that at this time. And then my last update is the recycled water program. This is agenda item 11BI. Not too much of an update from last month. We did release Section 5 to our technical team, again, which includes Krieger and Stewart from the Water District and Mike Nunley from the city. That section really was just a documentation of a meeting that the technical team had several weeks ago to discuss the different components of how we were going to select a recycled water project. So that has been released, and we're awaiting comments from the technical team. And again, sort of an ongoing item, we are preparing an agenda and looking at potential meeting times to eventually approach the regional board to enter into a discussion about where we're going as far as recycled water and how they see any issues or concerns arising with a deep well injection project. So we're hoping to schedule that meeting with the regional board here shortly. And again, we're sort of working on defining the injection project in terms of locations and treatment needs and storage and other information that would be required for preliminary design level analysis. And then separately from that, we are continuing to work with Capital Corps on potential grant funding opportunities for recycled water, and we hope to have a tech memo sometime later this year, sort of documenting the work that the technical team has been doing for recycled water and providing sort of a preliminary design level of the recycled water project so that we can move into eventual later design stages and environmental and permitting. So that is all I have, Steve, unless you have anything else that you wanted to add.
No, I don't, Joseph. Thank you very much. That's a good report. I'll move on to the next item,
Could I
which is,
make a comment or question? Last month, when I asked about progress being made toward being able to measure the change to groundwater and storage, I was told that there would be new information and solutions that by the middle of the summer. May I ask, is that still on schedule?
yeah, it is, and I think I mentioned earlier that there were several items that we were listing for the TAC as potential topics. That's one of them, because we definitely want the TAC to be involved in that evaluation.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll report on the Water Resources Manager item C-1, Basin Model Configuration Management Plan. Just for those who aren't familiar with that, that is the Navy DRI model that we've used for the GSP. This the basin model, basically a 3D model. It's been cooperatively used between our office and the Navy using their consultant DRI, and at times we've even used DRI on some of that. The plan has always been to move that model into the Groundwater Authority's possession, jointly owned by the Groundwater Authority and by the Navy. The configuration management plan is the process by which that will happen. The configuration management plan was drafted, prepared, reviewed by the Navy, and is now being implemented. A big part of that configuration management plan is the development of a technical modeling group, TMG. It's a technical modeling group that will guide the management of the model. Any future model runs would be run through that group. Any modifications to the model, any updates would all be done through the technical modeling group. Jean Moran is running that for our office. She's actually on vacation. She's supposed to give this report, but she's on vacation right now. Jean Moran is running that group. They've had 2 meetings already, which were very successful. They've got things lined out. They've got all the documents they need to review so that everybody starts out on the same page. And their next meeting is scheduled for June 16th. Those things are moving in that direction very well with Jean. Last thing is not on the agenda, but I just wanted to mention it because Director Vittori did bring it up, and I want to make sure there's no not misinformation or lack of information being given out to the board and the public. When it comes to the GSP and the recommended corrective actions, I want the board to know and the public know we are working on those. We've already had 2, maybe you can consider 3 internal coordination meetings where we've gone over each one of the recommended corrective actions. We've developed a process to address those. We've even assigned it to the staff people who will be doing it. So we've organized it in-house to assign people to address each one of those recommended corrective actions, sort of developed a matrix around how we're going to address all of those questions or recommendations that were made, so that they'll be done in time for the 5-year update. So I just let you know that we are working on that internally, and it is we don't see any issues addressing those going forward. And with that, we'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Are there any questions from the board?
I don't have a question, but the communication and engagement issue that we just worked on today was one of those corrective actions. That would that be considered to be working on the positive side of that corrective action?
That's correct. That is one of those, and yes, that's being done too, yes. Thank you, David. And Carol, sorry.
Okay, any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, seeing none, are there any members of the public that would like to comment on this report? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to item number 12, and that is the general manager's report. And oh, hang on one second. Looks like we have a caller on the phone. Go ahead, caller.
Hello, yeah, this is Renee Westelusk. I just have a question on the regional board. Who are they and where are they located?
It's the Lahontan Regional Board. They're the ones that monitor, investigate, permit discharges to the basin, to any groundwater supply, surface and groundwater supply. They're the agency that we would need to get a permit from to do recycled water injection or even recycled water, typically recycled water use of any kind. But they're the agency that issues NPDS, National Discharge Pollution and Elimination System permits. So yeah, they're the regulatory agency that we would go through for the recycled water project, the primary agency.
They're located in Victorville.
In Victorville.
Local.
Yeah, Victorville, sorry.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other callers? Not looking like it. Okay, we'll now move on to item number 12, and that's the general manager's report, and I'll turn it over to Carol.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have in your packet our monthly financials. Happy to answer any questions if you have them. I do want to make a couple of notes here. One is that we, staff overlooked placing the quarterly repayment to Kern County as one of our payables on this agenda, so you will see it on our July agenda. Just so those folks know, just sorry, an oversight on staff's part, but we will manage that at our next meeting. Additionally, we addressed the audit, and I mentioned earlier in the meeting that we would like to bring a proposal for the 2021 audit back to the board on the July agenda. If there's no objections, we would simply recommend that we have Brown Armstrong perform the audit again, primarily because we've had so much coordination with those folks, with that auditor over the past year or so, and we have everything ready to go, and we feel that this will be a very quick process compared to all of the effort that it took and the coordination it took to get where we were this year. You know, there's the option of soliciting bids, but our recommendation is that we go one more year with the existing auditor, and if you agree with that, we'll bring their proposal to you for consideration next month.
Okay, do we, are you just looking for
I'm just-
kind of general consensus on that?
Exactly. Is there a nod for us to put that on the agenda, or specific wishes that we need to do something different?
Okay, are there any thoughts from the board on that, or any objections to it?
I'm in agreement with it.
Okay, I'm not hearing any objections, and I think that makes sense, sticking with this same firm and just moving forward with the work they started, so.
Okay, very good. We'll have that for you on the next agenda then for consideration and discussion. And then lastly, you have in your packet the report, monthly report from Capital Core Group. They've been busy doing a lot of work for us. They're continuing to work on our imported water supply purchases. They've been working on securing some federal funding, specifically continuing with the Defense Communities Infrastructure Program, and also looking to get us into this year's WRDA, Water Resources Development Act. Also working on state funding as well, a budget request, and some other measures. If you have any questions, I believe Jeff Simonetti is still on the line, but otherwise, that would conclude my report.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Are there any questions from the board on that report or comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to public comment. Is there anybody that'd like to speak to the general manager's report? Seeing none here, we'll go to the phones. Caller, go ahead.
That's correct. That is one of those, and yes, it's being done.
Go ahead, caller.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments from the board? Caller, if you can hear, would you mute your speakers and go ahead with your comment?
My name's Mike Sonot. I'm reading the corrective actions. First of all, I'd like to say they're not just suggestions, and the corrective actions are actually pretty clear, specifically corrective action number 4. It says update the plan to include projects and management actions It says the contingency plan should include additional projects and management actions. And it says the plan should be amended to include an updated and detailed timetable for adoption and implementation. It says provide updates related to negotiation details and implementation of the imported water project options. Details are warranted regarding the feasibility of confidential supply sources, availability of water rights, infrastructure, and funding, particularly because imported water supplies were reported in the Water Year 2020 annual report not to have been pursued, and how they could be affected in times of drought when sources for water importers are less than anticipated. You keep saying 5 years for the renewal. It's not 5 years, it's 2.5 years from the beginning of the initial submission of the GSP. You don't have the data after 7 years to tell us the change of groundwater and storage. You don't have a budget forward because you don't know how much money you're going to be able to collect in grants or otherwise replenishment fees.
Mr. Schnott, is this? I was just going to ask if this is related to the general manager's report.
Is my time up?
No, I'm at, but this is for the time for public comment during the during the general manager's report.
Option number 4 says update and include a contingency plan with additional projects.
Okay, Mr. Schnott.
Right now about GSP and the general
Mr. Schnott,
manager.
Are these comments related to the general manager's report?
Yes.
Okay.
They are precisely related to the general manager's report, because what he's doing is telling us that he's going to put the implementation of any corrective actions into his organizational structure to plan what they're going to do. I think that's a matter for public debate. Okay? So in the meantime, you don't have any idea how this adjudication is going to end out. Therefore, you cannot go out and buy $50 million in the water futures market and try to connect to the state water project in California City. This has been the plan from day one of this GSA. People are angry. Nobody's going to volunteer to help you. So everything you do from now on will be administrative and billable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments on the general manager's report? Okay, caller, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Renee Westelusk. I'm asking about the Mr. Simonetti's report from Capital Corps. It's like page 2 where it lists, it's part of the chart contained on page 1 where it lists the governor's drought resiliency package programs of interest. And at the very bottom it says Department of Conservation multi-benefit land repurposing. There was a land repurposing bill last year that the governor signed a budget trailer bill. This is back in 2021, and I believe they allotted $51 million for that. But I see in the chart for this year, I believe it's the same land repurposing bill. The governor had put in for $40 million, but then in the column that shows what actually has been appropriated, I guess, by the May revision of the budget, it says 0. So does that mean there's not going to be any money available for farmland that would need to be fallowed? And that could affect our valley too. Does anybody know anything about that? Or is there any chance more money will be put in at the end of the budget signing, etc.?
Question for
uh,
Jeff Simonetti?
Yeah.
Yes, Chair,
Go ahead,
this is Jeff. So the answer to Renee's question is that this is still in the process. The budget has not been finalized yet, but there are two potential programs that are moving forward. There still is a potential that the multi-purpose land fallowing program will move forward. There's a couple of different pools of money that are potentially going to be there. The one that you saw, yes, was zeroed out, but they're still in negotiations and discussion moving forward on that. The second is that there's a larger program that we are potentially going to weigh in on as well, that is pertaining to a program that's up to 1.5 billion with a B dollars on purchasing water rights and associated with farmland. And that is going through the Senate right now. And a lot of what you saw there, the reason why that gets zeroed out is that that's all kind of getting amalgamated into one larger program. The answer to your question is, though, that the large sums of money are still getting negotiated through the budget, and we're anticipating that we'll have further details in the next week or two as that gets finalized. But as soon as we have the finalized data on where the budget is moving, we'll certainly send an interim update around.
Okay, I just want to say, well, that's good news, because that bill last year it was grant money to find other uses for ag land in critically overdrafted water basins. And I think our basin could benefit if we can qualify for any of the funds. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, that brings us to the end of the agenda. Our next meeting is scheduled for July 13th, 2022. And without objection, we are adjourned.